So colleagues, welcome to the panel on digital government. We had just a Calypso-style presentation from Barbados. Thank you very much, Cleveland. And we earlier had Paul Shetler talking about his experience with UK and Australia. Let's add now to the narratives one more presentation by Joana Valente. To introduce her briefly, she is an executive level advisor at Ernst & Young and also the partner advisory for Oceania and digital government lead partner. Before this, she had a career in IBM where she led large IT transformation projects. After her presentation, we will then take questions, and like I discussed with Paul, since we earlier didn't have a Q&A session, he welcomes questions that you might have for him to kick off, and if there isn't any, he has something up his sleeve to give you some more feedback. So Joana, over to you.
Just adjust mic first. Apologies. Hello. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you today. I was just reflecting that I've been in the industry for a long time, about 25 years, working in technology-enabled transformation. Thank you. And one of the things I enjoyed the most is actually really taking a global perspective and working across a range of countries, not just Australia, to try and leverage lessons learned across the world is something that I'm very passionate about. So just a little bit more background. So I started my career in technology in the banking and insurance sector, a sector that I think is still ahead of government in most countries. I'm currently advising the Australian government, but I'm also advising, for example, the Indonesian government and the French government on the role of technology and really what does digital mean for nations and what is the role of government. And today I want to touch on five topics with you very, very quickly. So, less than a minute maybe on each of them. I'm going to put my stopwatch on just to help me here with my 15 minutes. But there are five things I wanted to explore with you today. The first one is actually, what do we mean by digital? Is it the same thing as technology? What is it really? So in the government context in particular, what does that mean? The second thing I wanted to pause and reflect on is, and with some statistics from Australia, is really who is the new human? Who is the new citizen? And is it just about citizens or about businesses as well? So that's the second thing. I also wanted to reflect on some interesting case studies that point to the art of the possible in digital solving interesting problems. And also touch on the role of the market. So what should government do to get more money from the private sector? And how to tap into that funding to solve problems faster and better. So the role of the market and the role of government and how to get that balance right is the other thing. And then perhaps some reflections based on the good, the bad, and the ugly of what works and what doesn't, and what are the top lessons we can take away from a range of implementations in digital transformation. So they're the five topics. Okay. So what is it that we're changing? And actually just recently I was advising a government in the Middle East. They had a minister in charge of digital and another minister in charge of technology. And there was a conversation about what is digital? Is it the same thing as technology? And in a very simplistic way, when I think about digital government, it's about tapping into massive advances in technology, not just certainly the ability to compute massive amounts of data very, very quickly, and the diminishing cost of key technology capability and storage. It's really about tapping into that and tapping into the fact that most humans right around the world, and I see that Samoa, the adoption of mobile usage is very, very high. It's close to 100%. It's tapping into the fact that behaviorally we're all very comfortable engaging with each other through digital channels. And it's about then leveraging the data that flows from those two things and leveraging that data to transform both domains of government. Now, I find in a lot of work I do with government that very often there's a lot of thinking about digital and how it can transform the way services are delivered, which of course it can. But there's a whole lot that you can tap into the way you start through, digital service delivery. You actually get to find out a whole lot more about your citizens, and the data that you're accumulating, digital data, very rich content, actually enables you as a government to ask very different questions about the programs and the policies that you're funding. So, for example, what is the relationship between the way your citizens are engaging with healthcare and what you might be doing in housing or in another area of policy around, for example, employment? The richness of what you can collect from a data perspective enables you to ask very, very, very interesting questions, and I've got a case study out of the UK that I'd like to share with you. I do find that globally and in Australia, sometimes we still misinterpret the definition of what success looks like. I still see examples, too many examples perhaps, and Paul Shetler, you commented on this, where people do feel that success in digital means a great website, or success in digital means I'm delivering all of the services through digital channels. And sometimes we actually end up in trouble when we do that. So there's a very large department in Australia that has invested millions and millions in digital service delivery capability. But when you look at the statistics, the cost of service delivery for that particular department has actually gone up, the cost efficiency. In other words, they've actually become less efficient. And the outcomes for Australians are actually reducing. So I do think we need to be very targeted in the way we apply technology and digital. Sometimes face-to-face interactions are still the most valuable. I think digital is about right-sizing the service delivery engagement, using digital channels where that makes sense, fast-tracking decisions where they're transactional in nature, so that you can really focus the limited resources you have on more human-to-human interactions. Now, sometimes you bring both the digital and the human together, and I've got a case study to talk to that as well. In Australia, every year for the last 3 years, I've engaged in a research study, and we publish a report every year. You might be interested in accessing it. It's called The Digital State of the Nation. And we interview or we survey over 1,500 Australians for this survey. I just want to highlight a couple of interesting things about what we learned about Australians and how they feel about digital engagement and about digital government. There's lots of stats on this page. I just want you to focus on the top left, which is that mobile usage is absolutely extensive throughout Australia. And I also want you to have a look at the dollar signs sort of on the other side of the slide, where you can see the amount of money spent by Australians, the average Australian, on digital services is absolutely massive. $204 the average spend per month by an average Australian on digital services. So there's a huge appetite to spend in this space and a huge interaction with digital channels. The only number I'd like you to focus on in this slide is the top left there, digital inequality. So as government policymakers, the last thing we want is for the use of technology and digital to actually increase inequality rather than decrease it. And in Australia, this geographically dispersed nation, you can see that there's a big difference in how, in the perceptions and in the capability of digital connection. 46% of those we surveyed in urban locations talk to advancements and the fact that they can connect digitally versus those that are living in rural and regional areas. Gaming, you see 47% of Australians engage actively in e-gaming. And I think that that's an amazing thing to tap into. There's a massive amount of e-gaming fans out there. There's probably a few of you in the audience. How can we leverage gaming and e-gaming as a way to engage with citizens. And some fantastic, again, other examples of governments tapping into that as a channel to engage citizens in policy domains such as healthcare, how to tap into the fact that we all like to compete and win and beat each other at games, how you tap into that to get, for example, citizens more engaged in their own healthcare and in improving preventative health outcomes. Australia has challenges. It is the 13th largest economy globally. However, we're ranked at the moment 18 in a survey or in an index, the Network Readiness Index. And what's interesting about this, so 18 is not great. We should be at least at 13. So there's a lot of reflection in Australia about, and in fact we've dropped over the last 2 years. We've actually gone backwards, not forwards. There's a lot of reflection in Australia about why are we only 18 and what more can we do. One of the main reasons why we are 18 and not better is actually the adoption of digital channels and technologies in our business sector in Australia is actually quite poor. So I urge you as policymakers, when you're thinking about digital and the problems that digital can assist you in solving in your region, consider not only the individual, but the business sector. The business sector is a massive, massive driver of economic growth and vitality. We asked Australians, every year we ask them, what are your thoughts about digital government? And what I wanted to highlight here is that 87% of Australians on average accessed at least one digital government service last year. Not much difference between men and women, and in terms of ages, sometimes we have a perception that digital is for the younger members of our community. You can see there the 89% and 85%. That's a distribution of usage by age, and you can see that there isn't a big disparity, at least in Australia, by age group in terms of the use of government. I'd like you to have a look at the 23-year-old case study part of this slide. I used this case study on purpose. My colleagues at Ernst & Young, when I produced this report this year, they said, Joana, why don't you use a more recent global case study? And I said, I want to use a 23-year-old case study on purpose, because success or failure in digital government has, and I think a few of the speakers reflected on this, has almost nothing to do with technological advances. Actually, we have for 20 plus years in Estonia, for example, really dealing with the data exchange challenge 20 plus years ago, I think. Most of the technology, we've had massive technology for a very, very long time. And this is a Belgian government case study. I was lucky enough to be involved somewhat with this case study. It was almost 25 years ago that I was engaged. So 23 years ago, to be specific, the Belgian government decided that it needed to connect itself up and reduce unnecessary burden on the community. So when somebody in the community changes their address, or somebody gives birth to a child and they need to register the child, or if they change address and that changes their entitlements, for example, with government, we all know that usually government acts as separate organizations and the citizen has to engage multiple times, and it can be very, very confusing for many members of the community to engage. And so the Belgian government 23 years ago said, we've got to stop this and we've got to solve this. We've got to become connected and we've got to engage in a connected way with our citizens. And they deployed what many governments in the world are still trying to implement, including Australia. Australia does not have this, and we're trying again. I'm actually advising the Digital Transformation Agency on this platform right now. It's the tell us once. Citizen, you are you, and we are government. And when you're engaging with us, we want to make it easy, seamless. We want to make it secure and safe. And we're going to connect up the way that we engage with you so that you don't have to fill out 5 different forms or travel kilometers to try and find your way through to some government support. So they implemented this using much older technology than we have now. The technology we have now is better than what they had, but they implemented it. The value to the economy is estimated at about 1.5 billion euros per annum of value to the economy through the reduction of burden, unnecessary burden on businesses and individuals. And there are 4 reasons why they succeeded, none of which have to do with technology. The first one is that they focused very much on giving individuals and citizens choice. If it was up to the citizen to agree or not to government connecting up information about them. So citizen choice, this goes to data sovereignty and privacy. The second reason why I think they succeeded was they were very clear on the purpose. They knew what problem they were trying to solve. They weren't trying to develop an app or a great website. They were trying to reduce burden, and they were very, very clear on that purpose. The third one is the WIFM. I've got it written as WIFM, but they really focused on what's in it for me. They focused on how am I going to get the citizen or the business owner to want to engage with government digitally? What's in it for them? They really focused on delivering value to the individual. And the final reason why they succeeded, and reflecting on our Estonian colleagues' reflections on my question earlier, it was led strongly from the centre. There was absolutely innovation across the board, but it was led centrally by one minister and one central body that was able to command and lead, because we are humans, and if you're trying to drive transformation, you need a central point of leadership. It's very hard to do this with no leadership. I want to just sprinkle a few, I think, inspiring case studies. This is a UK, one of my favourite case studies out of the UK. It's a very large not-for-profit organisation that is using cognitive computing to decipher handwritten notes from caseworkers who are working with disadvantaged members of the population. And the cognitive computing capability is not only enabling the caseworkers to better assist the young people that they're trying to help, but it's also providing the government with new insights about what works and what doesn't in the social services sector. So that's the use of digital engagement, but more importantly, data-driven analysis. Another one, agriculture is a critical part of the Samoan economy. This is another great case study of using smartphones and again artificial intelligence to really enable farmers to depict. Oh, there's my timer. I shouldn't have put that on loudspeaker. Now you all know I'm out of time. It allows farmers in their own with a simple mobile phone, farmers to identify where they have issues with diseases in their crops. Aging is a massive challenge in Australia and other countries. I like to reflect again that sometimes digital is not the only solution, it's one of many. And there are 3 examples here of how different countries are tackling the impact of aging. In certainly highly industrialized economies, the old can feel very isolated. Isolation has been linked with the development of some pretty bad health outcomes. And there's an example in the UK where they're using face-to-face, the postman in the UK, because there are fewer letters and parcels being delivered. Well, there's a lot of parcels being delivered, but fewer letters. Most postal services in countries are trying to reinvent themselves. And in the UK, they're looking at whether the postman and the postwoman can become more than just a deliverer of something, whether they can be leveraged to connect with old people who are often living alone and very, very isolated. There's also the use of virtual reality. It's a very technical virtual reality in nursing homes to give, again, very isolated older residents in those nursing homes the ability to connect with each other, to go on virtual trips virtually, and to connect with family. I'll share perhaps a couple of my observations.
If you can zip through.
Yes, zip, very much zip. I think a couple of lessons learned from Indonesia all the way to France and Australia. The difference between success and failure, a big part of that is the why. Being really clear on the problem that you're looking to address with digital technology. What problem are we trying to solve, and for whom are you trying to solve it for? Is it for individuals in the community? Is it for the disadvantaged? Is it for all the community? Is it for the business sector in the community? The other key lesson learned is that digital transformation should be iterated, but it is a long-term path because it is transformative. And it's an unknown path through curves and roundabouts with lots of uncertainty. And so I think one of the other lessons learned out of successful transformations globally is the ability to accept the fact that there is uncertainty in a long path and to define interim stages of that path that you can absolutely measure and reflect on. Leave you with one additional thought, which is that governments typically either overestimate their role in transforming and solving problems or underestimate their role. Now, this is a big topic. There are market economists who believe government should just get out of the way. The market can solve all the problems by itself, government. You're just overcomplicating everything. Get out of the way. And then you've got different views. The reason why I have flowers in this slide is there are people who believe that you should just let the flowers bloom, let the market solve problems. And if you look at some sectors, like the digital apps sector, that sector has created massive innovation without any government intervention. If you look at Uber, massive innovation in the transport sector with minimum government intervention. If I look at the banking sector, certainly, of course, strong levels of government regulation. All of these have had government regulation. But government is more a participant rather than the main funder and the main driver. When do you let the industry and the innovators in the industry solve the problems for government? And when does government step in? And I would say it's a fine balance. However, government must, I believe, have a key role in 4 domains, 5 if you add vision. The first one is identity, and we talked about identity today. Without identity, it's very hard for innovation in the market to solve some of the problems it faces. Integration and connectivity and interoperability. For innovators in Australia right now, one of the other engagements I'm advising on is healthcare. The Australian government has spent more than $500 million implementing a My Health record, an electronic record of healthcare. But when I engage with entrepreneurs in the market and I say, take this health record and build something on top of it to solve even more interesting problems, they say, well, I don't know how to interoperate with it. I can't connect to it. So if government doesn't lead the development of standards, it's very difficult to inspire commercial innovation and commercial funding. I strongly recommend that you do lead that, and security would be the other one. And I'll wrap it up there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joana. I think what you brought back into this conversation is the question about the why, the purpose. And listening to some of the conversations earlier today, which all touched on digital government as well, I think we've brought out various dimensions and drivers for why we're going towards digital with government. I just want to flag some of them before we go into the Q&A. So one key driver could be that government simply wants to make savings and increase efficiency. That hasn't been mentioned very much because it's not something we often flag up in conferences, but it is a factor, efficiency. One is actually to go along with what others are doing. UK has it, we must have it. Tonga has it, Samoa must have it. Examples of that are also plentiful. Then there are the ones that I would rate higher on the list. Increasing the quality of life of our citizens, such as providing access for the first time to some of the citizens who previously were excluded from some of the services or entitlements that we as government want to deliver. Then there is gap filling and innovation. Actually, government looking for new areas like this app on farming and agriculture, things that haven't been done before, where all of a sudden government goes in and says, hey, we can support this activity by innovation. Then there's governments that are now looking at live events as a driver for their digital delivery or generally service delivery. The government of Singapore is now reorganizing itself to basically say that there are standard events in life for every one of us. birth of a child, the death of a family member, can we actually proactively provide predictive services around these life events where all the relevant agencies work towards supporting the citizen in dealing with that life event? And then, of course, there are challenges and problem-solving type drivers behind going digital. Just wanted to bring that back into the conversation because the impetus for why we do this is so varied. There's so many different reasons for it. Now let me open it to the audience for questions. We have Cleveland here who presented us with the insights from the Caribbean, and also Paul's scene setting presentation in the morning. Maybe let me start with Paul. Do you have any questions related to his presentation this morning? Yes. We have one from Peter. Anybody else? Okay, one more. Peter and Mohammed, please.
Oh, thank you. Can you give me a balance between service and control? I feel very uneasy because I became completely disemboweled as a person. I don't even have to be there because everything is known about it. So at which point do I have control over myself? Rather than the control is in everybody in the government's hands first, of me as a person.
Okay, we had one more question, Mohammed.
My question it's about government in general, but specifically in this case about Australia. I just want to know, in Africa we have an issue, for example, where governments change, everything changes, and we hear the same thing about the Caribbean. In Australia, you seem to be having the same problem, where governments change and a lot of good ideas are thrown out and then have to be starting all over again. And the case I have in point is, for example, the NBN, where to me it was a no-brainer. This was probably the best idea that ever came from this part of the world. And then I was away for a while, I came back, and then I've seen a mess. I'm just wondering, what can one do as a citizen, Australian citizen, apart from not electing that government? What can be done? I suppose you're a CIO in government, and I was listening to you this morning about all the good things you have done. But what can be done to stop something like this happening? Yeah.
So the question between, what does government do, what does the individual do? I mean, that's a deeply political question. This is going back thousands of years. I mean, what is the role of government, right? What is the role of government vis-a-vis the individual? What is the role of sovereign power? How much, we heard this phrase, self-sovereignty earlier today, which is kind of an interesting thing when you have a conversation with people in government, because normally government is considered the sovereign power, not the individual. So it just opens up that question, right? If you have a particular viewpoint, perhaps, you may say that the government should be providing lots and lots of services, right? That individuals should be protected from the choices that they make or from chance that happens in life that they have no control. If you are more on the liberal end of the spectrum, Mike may say, actually, that's not true. Individuals are the foundation of society, and therefore they should bear responsibility. I mean, that's a political question, I think, ultimately. But it's one that has to be taken into account when you're designing your services, and it's definitely one that's going to be having to take, and it's one that I think is often not really asked when we talk about things like policy design. Policy design, policy isn't developed in a vacuum. There's no such thing as a best policy. There's such a thing as a best policy to achieve a particular outcome, which is one that's already conditioned by governing philosophy. And I think that's not really a question of digital government. That's a political question.
I might just add some reflections as well. It is a deeply personal to your question, Peter, about the human and Big Brother. You know, in fact, am I no longer in control of my identity, of my data, of how I choose to engage? And I think the most successful digital change programs anywhere in the world have been the ones that have focused on what's in it for the citizen, being very transparent with the citizen, first of all, being very transparent, and giving the citizen choice. Do you want to engage with us in this way? Do you want us to share your data with another department so you don't have to fill out 5 different forms? But allowing the citizen to say, no, I don't want that. I do want to turn up and speak to a human. We fail when we don't put the control in the hands of the citizen and when we're not transparent. So we're, at the moment guiding the implementation of the national rollout of the My Health Record in Australia. It has failed. The last time it was rolled out, it failed. We are steering it, and I am advising on that program, by giving the citizen choice. Every time they see a doctor in Australia, that person can say, doctor, I want you to upload the consultation we've just had on my digital record, or you can say, no, I don't want you to do that. I think citizen control and transparency is really important.
Could I just add to that? One thing I like to add to that. When you make those kind of statements about individual control and individual autonomy, we assume certain kind of political. If we were to look at the single country, which actually no one in this room has mentioned today, quite interesting, a single country that is actually building digital government, right? Breakneck speed. That's China, PRC. And I think in the PRC, the question would be, do they really ask that question? Do you want to share your data? And I think the answer is no, they don't. Right? Because they're looking at it from a different perspective. But the perspective there is different than the Western liberal perspective. That allows them to do certain things that will stop them from doing others. Again, it's a question of what we want to do as a country and as a political unit.
Thanks, Paul. I want to avoid getting into the political part of it. I think you're making important points about how it relates to politics and framing, and how it serves the government of the day and the decisions that are made about what shall be accomplished with digital means. Can I just ask,
did we want to reflect on the other question?
Are there any questions for Cleveland Thomas on the Caribbean experience? One from Mohammed, and then we'll pass on to you for a question.
About the NBN question that you had asked. I mean, I live in Australia, and I have to say that, when I lived in London, I had really bad bandwidth. Really was appalling, actually. All my friends used to laugh at me. Now that I moved to Australia, it's even worse. And so NBN actually has been a mitigated disaster, not only in terms of service, but also in terms of politics. It had a very bad effect on the administration's creds in the business community, but also on the population. It seems to me that the decisions that were made there were, when you make sort of technical decisions, there were a series of technical decisions that were made there. They weren't made on technical grounds. Come down to it, right? They were made on various other political grounds, and that's a different question to service design, and that's a different question to what government does. But if government does do something, it should do something on obviously on competent technical grounds. And there was a constant series of issues there with that, not only after some of the initial decisions that were made, and by the way, some of those decisions date back to the labor power as well, right? So it's not like this only happened under Turnbull. This is going on from labor, then to Turnbull, and then continuing. It's just not been treated as a serious issue. And I think this is a general question with Australia, which is Australia does not take technology and digital and that whole kind of way of doing things seriously. Right? Australia still has an extractive mindset as a country, which is why you don't see an awful lot of generative activity there, and why you don't really take tech seriously. So she'll be all right. She'll be okay. Right, Meg? So, I mean, that's the thing. And that's the problem, really.
your question, which is what can citizens do about that? I think most of our countries now have minority governments, which means they flip. And how do you stick? How do you get change to stick? I think the appointment of usually change, transformative change, is dependent on usually one strong cabinet minister. Don't need too many, just one would be good. But you know, a very, very strong cabinet minister. But then you also need a very, very strong leader, departmental leader. I'm going to choose New Zealand now as a sort of an example, I think, of change that sticks. The head of finance, Gabs McLoof, the leader for the finance sector, the minister, and the head of the Department of Finance, collaborated so strongly over a massive change to the way the New Zealand government thinks about itself. It's moved away from thinking about housing, health, employment as verticals, and it uses data now and data analytics and economic modeling to really optimize decisions horizontally across all these domains. And I think it was because of two change drivers, and one of whom was in the bureaucracy. So when the government changed, he stayed, and they were effective enough together over a period of 3 years to really sell the dream to the population and to their peers, so that when the government changed, the change wasn't lost.
The point that Joana makes is absolutely essential about politics. And I think one of the issues that you were talking about, your example of Tell Us Once.
Paul, I'm going to have to give you 1 minute, and then we have to move to the last question.
It's actually a really important point, right? So if you think about Tell Us Once, which is the example we given 23 years ago, it still doesn't work. One of the first things I looked at when I came to Australia in 2015 was, tell us once. And they were like, how do we make this work? And the answer was, you couldn't, because it was done by a department that actually had no central remit, that had zero mandate. It was viewed as a tax on the agencies, that they all had to pay to be part of this, but there was no guarantee anything was actually going to happen. And it wasn't mandated. And there was no political will to make it happen. So you put all that together in a very balkanized environment, you say, what's the chance of that coming through? And it doesn't happen. I think Joana's absolutely right about that.
Thank you both. I think it's very interesting because we're getting to how you lead that change, who's in charge, whether you can leverage your political decision makers to support your change, and then how do you reach out to your agencies to support even financially, and how do you distribute the benefits. Okay, our last question for the session, I apologize for the delay, is on our Caribbean experience.
Thank you. So my question is a bit on the pathway towards development that you have sketched out, and I totally agree with the first steps that we need connectivity to actually get anywhere. For the next steps, I'm a bit unsure. Maybe if you look at the IDI, it's probably a bit outdated. I think it was developed probably like 1-2 years after the iPhone came on the market, the first one. So I think we're actually way ahead in technical development, and I think we should reflect this in the plans that we make now, because we have all this Internet of Things, we have all these fancy technologies like very small mass spectrometers that you can build into phones to scan material and whatnot, and drones and stuff, and intelligent switches that you can connect to the internet and all that kind of things. And if we now concentrate on mobile phones, we're kind of missing that step. And I think there's a chance, if you're not really in that stage like Australia, being stuck in building NBN stuff, but you're actually deciding on where you want to go now. If you take this into account, you probably kind of can leapfrog ahead and do things that others don't do.
Yeah. So you have full support for the Caribbean for that comment.
Okay.
That's what I'm hearing. Comment from you? All right. Okay, let me close the session in the interest of time. I think we've heard some interesting experiences on digital government. I know there's still people wanting to ask questions, but I'm going to have to close the session. Tala will otherwise lead me up behind the doors. Thank you all for attending, and let's give our panelists a good round of applause.
Thank you very much, Arndt.